He stood under the cold rain, arms wrapped around a trash bag filled with crumpled clothes, watching the only home he'd ever known vanish behind a locked door. Inside, the man who used to call him son had just spat a different name filth before shutting him out. The porch light flickered once, then darkness swallowed everything. That was the last time Rowan ever stood on that doorstep. After his mother died of cancer, Rowan had clung to the only family he had left: his father, James. Their life had never been extravagant, but there was warmth in the small house with its uneven steps and kitchen that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. James wasn't affectionate, but he made sure Rowan had lunch money and sketch pads. It was enough for a quiet boy who found his world in colors and silence. Then Diane arrived. She swept into their lives with soft-voiced politeness and carefully wrapped gifts. At first, Rowan thought she might be kind, but kindness isn't always loud. Sometimes, it erodes you in whispers. Diane began subtly. She moved his mother's photographs into a box in the attic, replacing them with her own floral prints. She tossed out the mug with his mom's lipstick stain, called it too chipped. Then one afternoon, Rowan left his sketchbook open on the dining table. He'd been drawing a classmate, Tyler, his features captured in soft graphite, eyes rendered with reverence. When Diane saw it, her lips curved, but not into a smile. From that moment, the erasure became deliberate. She started insisting James spend more time with her side of the family. Rowan's favorite meals disappeared from the grocery list, his mother's keepsakes gone. When Rowan overheard Diane refer to him as that boy, something inside him curled into itself. James became more distant. The laughter they once shared during movie nights faded. He began echoing Diane's opinions, even when they contradicted years of memory. Rowan wondered if his father noticed how invisible he was becoming, or if that was the point. Then came the night. Rain slammed against the windows. Rowan had returned from school, soaked, to find Diane standing by the door with a trash bag and a folded $20 bill. James didn't speak. He wouldn't even look at him. Rowan tried to ask why, but all Diane said was, "You're not welcome here anymore. And don't come back, not with your sickness." He didn't understand until later. Not fully, but the moment Diane shut the door behind him, calling him a shame to this family, something in him cracked. He walked. His sneakers were soaked, his fingers numb. He didn't know where he was going until a porch light blinked ahead. It belonged to Aunt Leah, his mother's younger sister. He hadn't seen her in years. She answered the door in a flannel robe, her face creased with concern. And without asking anything, no judgment, no hesitation, she pulled him into her arms and held him tight. That was the first time Rowan felt safe in what felt like forever. He slept that night on a squeaky couch with a blanket that smelled of lavender. And even though the storm outside raged on, for the first time in weeks, he slept without dreaming of vanishing. They had taken everything from him: his home, his identity, his place in the world, but they hadn't erased his name. Not yet. And this was only the beginning. If this story speaks to you, or if you've ever felt erased by the people meant to protect you, follow us at Heart Story, where true stories find their voice. Because sometimes, surviving is just the first chapter. And maybe, just maybe, the rain isn't the end. It's the cleansing before the truth. The couch creaked under Rowan's weight, a secondhand thing that sagged in the middle and scratched his skin through the thin sheet. It wasn't meant for sleeping, and neither was the living room, but for now, it was the closest thing to home he had. He didn't speak much during those first few weeks. He didn't know how. Words felt useless after being told that his existence was shameful. He stopped drawing. He stopped humming to himself. Even the way he walked seemed smaller, as if he was trying to take up less space. Leah, sensing everything without prying, simply left meals by the couch and smiled when he managed to eat. Rowan began to wither in silence. Not visibly at first, but in the way he flinched when he heard car doors at night, or how he kept his shoes close to the sofa, just in case he had to leave again. At school, he pretended to be fine. But rumors spread faster than truth. Diane had told neighbors and relatives that Rowan had run off with some boy, that he was unstable, even dangerous. A lost cause, she'd said. The words followed him. Students whispered, teachers averted their eyes. One guidance counselor even asked, gently, if he planned to transfer. Rowan smiled and said, no, because deep down, he still believed in staying, somewhere in the pit of his chest. He clung to the belief that he didn't deserve to vanish. One afternoon, Leah handed him a dusty cardboard box. It was your mother's, she said quietly. Inside, beneath yellowed receipts and birthday cards, Rowan found a notebook. The cover was cracked and the binding loose, but the handwriting inside was unmistakable. It belonged to her. Near the back, wedged between grocery lists and ideas for holiday decorations, was a short line, scrawled hastily, trust fund for Rowan's future, no matter what. The words didn't feel real. Not until Leah took a sharp breath beside him and sat down, her expression tight. I remember she mentioned it once. She said almost to herself, right before the surgery, she said James would handle it, that she didn't want Rowan ever needing anything from Diane, but no one had ever spoken of it again. James, as legal guardian after her death, had full access to everything, her belongings, her savings, her policies, and as it turned out, her silence. They didn't confront him right away. There was nothing to confront him with yet. But that single note lit something inside Rowan. Not anger, not yet. It was a quiet resolve, a need to understand how far the deception had gone, a need to reclaim something, anything that was his. That same week, Rick offered him a job. He was Leah's partner, worked in construction, and didn't ask personal questions. Rowan said yes without thinking. The work was grueling. Early mornings, splinters, sweat in his eyes, calluses blooming on fingers once meant for pencils, but it gave him purpose. At the end of each shift, his body ached, but his mind didn't spiral. Rick taught him how to use tools, how to read blueprints, how to trust his hands again. More importantly, Rick never looked at him like a broken thing. Rowan saved every paycheck. He made copies of his mother's notebook. He started collecting old bills, tracking paper trails. Rick introduced him to someone who knew about probate law. And slowly, a picture began to form. One that stretched beyond Diane's cruelty and James's silence. Behind their calm suburb facade was a truth that had been buried deep, assets diverted, insurance policies drained, the future of a child sold off behind closed doors. But Rowan wasn't a child anymore. And the people who erased him had no idea that he was learning how to build. Sometimes, rebuilding yourself doesn't begin with revenge. It begins with quiet labor, with learning to hold a hammer, with folding blankets neatly on the same couch that has held your worst nightmares. It begins the moment you stop waiting for rescue and start becoming it. It started with a framed photo, tucked behind the dusty blinds of an old bookstore window. Rowan had just finished his shift at the construction site, shoulders sore and knuckles bruised. When he passed the window and caught a glimpse of a familiar face, he stepped closer. The photo was faded, its colors sun-washed. But the man beside his mother was unmistakable. Same blue eyes, same jawline, same slant of the smile. Inside. He asked the shopkeeper about the picture. The man adjusted his glasses and said softly, "That was Leland, your mother's old flame? He used to bring her poetry books. She was crazy about him." Then he paused. "Wait, aren't you James's son?" Rowan didn't answer. He just stared at the photo, his chest tight with something he couldn't name. Back at Leah's, he searched through what remained of his mother's old belongings. In one envelope, carefully folded between ultrasound prints and birthday cards, he found a letter. It wasn't addressed to anyone. Just a note in his mother's hand: "Leland will never know about Rowan. James promised to raise him as his own. I hope he keeps that promise, even if I'm gone." Rowan sat still for a long time. The air in the room felt heavier. He hadn't just been rejected by a father. He had never truly belonged to him in the first place. James had known. He had agreed to raise Rowan. But love given out of promise wasn't the same as love given freely. And when Diane came, that thin thread of obligation had snapped. Rowan hadn't been a son to James, only a symbol of a history he no longer wanted. And Diane had made it easier to throw him away. The realization didn't crush Rowan. It clarified him. There was no longing left to salvage something that had never been real. But questions remained. Why had no one else in the family reached out? Where were his mother's parents? What had happened to the others who once smiled in photographs? Leah hesitated at first, but eventually gave him the last piece he needed, a faded address scribbled on a Christmas card, never mailed. Rowan traveled 3 towns over and stood in front of a red brick house with flower beds that had grown wild. An old woman opened the door, cautious at first, until he said his mother's name. Tears welled in her eyes. She called for her husband, and within moments, Rowan was surrounded by trembling hands and quiet gasps. His grandparents. They hadn't abandoned him. They'd been cut off, calls blocked, letters returned, visits refused. After the funeral, Diane made it clear they weren't welcome. And James, he had said nothing. Over tea and cracked photo albums, they told Rowan the rest. Before her death, his mother had created a scholarship fund in his name meant to be activated when he turned 18. A separate trust, untouched by James, sealed by legal protection. Only the named recipient could access it. But the trust had been emptied. Documents confirmed what Rowan feared: forged signatures, unauthorized withdrawals, and payments rerouted to new accounts bearing James's name. Real estate purchases, car upgrades, and private school tuition for Diane's children, not her own. The paper trail was precise. Rowan's name had been used again and again, not as a person, as a key. He held the documents in his hands and felt something new, not anger, not sorrow, certainty. The boy they had tried to erase had been watching, gathering, growing. James had taught him a cruel lesson that silence could be weaponized and trust exploited. But in doing so, he had also created the very thing he feared: a son who knew how to read contracts, trace transfers, and reclaim what was stolen. Sometimes, discovering who you are means learning who you are not. Rowan wasn't James's son. He wasn't a mistake or a phase or a secret to be hidden. He was a legacy they failed to destroy. And while pain can silence, it can also sharpen. He wasn't going to disappear again. Rowan never raised his voice. He didn't need to. His quiet became weight. His presence, once overlooked, grew deliberate. Every step he took now was calculated, and behind each one was a paper trail thick enough to bury a man. With the help of his grandparents and a lawyer specializing in estate recovery, Rowan compiled a timeline. Every forged signature, every withdrawn dollar, every transaction under Diane's name traced back to one source: James, the same man who locked the door on a child and thought it would end there. The discovery wasn't just shocking. It was surgical. Mortgage records, vehicle titles, private school invoices, all paid using accounts linked to Rowan's name. Funds from the insurance policy meant for his future had been rerouted into a lifestyle built on theft. The house James now lived in with Diane and her children, bought with money his mother earned teaching night classes while battling cancer. But Rowan didn't want revenge that burned wild. He wanted something colder, lasting. He spent weeks preparing a package of judgment, not from the courts, but from the truth. Inside a plain black box were certified copies of every legal document: the trust fund withdrawal records, the notarized statement from the bank, a scanned letter written by his mother before she died, the forensic handwriting report confirming James had forged his name, and photographs of the new house James now lived in, each room bought at the cost of a child's future. And finally, a letter, handwritten, not bitter, not angry, just honest. He didn't send the box by mail. That would have been too easy to ignore. Instead, he asked his childhood friend Eli, one of the few who had stood by him when others believed the worst, to hand deliver it. Rowan didn't need to see the moment unfold. He imagined it well enough. James opened the door to find a familiar face, a name from Rowan's past. Eli said nothing, just handed him the box and left. Rowan waited. 2 days passed, then 3. On the 4th day, Leah opened the front door and froze. James stood on the porch, hair disheveled, face pale. The man who once shouted, "Don't come back," now trembled on unfamiliar ground. He asked to speak to Rowan. Leah didn't move. She didn't invite him in. She simply turned and called into the house. Rowan stepped out, calm, older, taller, eyes clear. James tried to speak, stumbling through broken phrases about misunderstanding, about how things had gotten complicated. He blamed Diane, claimed ignorance about some details, pleaded for a conversation, just the two of them. Rowan listened, let him ramble. Then, with no emotion, he answered, "You are not my father. You were a man with access, that's all. And now, you're a man with debt. A debt that speaks in six figures and silence." James tried to protest, but Rowan stopped him with a look. Not cruel, not angry, just done. "Whatever you were to me," Rowan said, "died the day you used my name like currency." Diane never returned. When she found out the truth had surfaced and the financial house of cards they built was collapsing, she packed her things and left with her children. James was left alone in a mortgage he couldn't afford, with a lawsuit pending and no allies left to soften the blow. But Rowan wasn't seeking personal ruin. He wasn't interested in watching a man beg. What he cared about was something quieter: acknowledgement and boundaries, and finally stepping out from under the shadow of someone else's cowardice. He walked back inside and closed the door behind him. Not with force, not with finality, just with peace. Because not every battle ends with applause. Sometimes it ends with silence reclaimed and dignity restored. And sometimes the greatest justice isn't about watching someone fall, but about knowing they can no longer reach you. The court settlement came quietly. No headlines, no spectacle, just a number on paper and a formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing. The amount recovered from frozen assets and property liens was enough to set Rowan up for a new beginning. But he had already decided this wasn't about starting over. It was about building forward. He didn't buy a sports car. He didn't disappear to somewhere no one knew his name. The first thing he did was call Leah into the kitchen, pour her a cup of coffee, and slide a small envelope across the table. Inside the deed to a modest, sun-filled house with a porch swing and a fenced garden, her name alone on the papers. She looked at him, stunned. Why? Rowan just smiled. "Because you never asked why I was the way I am. You just made space." It was the kind of gratitude that didn't need a speech, just a key. The second thing he did was reach out to the same legal team who had helped him recover his stolen inheritance. But this time, it wasn't about fighting a battle. It was about opening a door. With their guidance, Rowan established a scholarship fund for LGBTQ+ youth who had been cast out by their families. He named it the Asterisk Grant, a nod to the symbol so often used to erase or qualify identity. Now, it would mark a beginning, not an exclusion. He gave talks at shelters, shared his story in classrooms, stood beside kids who still flinched when someone said home. Not for recognition, for restoration. Months passed. Then one autumn evening, during a fundraising gala for the foundation, someone tapped him on the shoulder. He turned, and there, standing under soft golden lights, was a boy no older than 15. Pale skin, hollow cheeks, a threadbare hoodie hanging off his thin frame. But his eyes were sharp, alert, alive. "Are you Rowan?" the boy asked, voice barely a whisper. Rowan nodded. "I just wanted to say, I was kicked out too, because I liked someone I wasn't supposed to." He looked down, then back up. "But your scholarship got me into art school, and I'm still here, because someone like you existed." For a moment, Rowan couldn't speak. He simply reached out and pulled the boy into a gentle hug, the kind that says, "I see you," without needing words. And in that moment, he wasn't the boy on the porch anymore. He wasn't the mistake, the secret, the burden. He was the reason someone else could breathe. Later that night, as he watched the crowd buzzing with hope, Rowan stepped outside for air. The city hummed in the distance. He looked up at the stars and thought of his mother, of Leah, of James, and the silence he left behind. But most of all, he thought of every child still out there standing in the rain with a trash bag of clothes, waiting for someone to see them as more than a thing to erase. He had no doubt now, one person's cruelty could break you, but one person's kindness could rebuild you, and sometimes, the person you save is the person you once were. Have you ever had someone believe in you when no one else did? Or were you the one who believed in yourself anyway? Tell us below. We read every story, and someone else might need to hear yours. Follow Heart Story for more powerful journeys like Rowan's, because some stories aren't just told, they're lived, survived, and passed on.